Hi Jeppe, I'm going to talk to you about your first written assignment in English. The way that I do this is I start out by correcting and revising and commenting on the text that you've written. And once I've done that, I make these videos. The purpose is that what I've written in your text and what you can see on IceCore in your text is kind of the corrections that have to do with your choice of words, grammar, things like that. They're very specific to the text. The feedback video is a more general comment of my overall impression of what you write and how you write. And I'll get into how you can improve in this video as well. So it's about kind of 8-10 minutes of me talking about your text. So consider this something that you can go back and revise and look back on when you write the next text, and also something that you can use as a point of departure for maybe a further conversation with me about writing, if that's something you want to do. So how this works is, first of all, you'll see in the text that I sometimes I correct errors directly in the text. Sometimes I ask you to consider certain things. It may be that your text has highlights in yellow. It means that you are committing an error that you have already done previously in the text. So instead of me correcting it all again and again, I highlight it in yellow so you can go back and look and see, okay, so this has been done previously in the text. So what I'll do now here, when I talk in more general terms, is to talk about structure and organization, and then if there are any kind of specific errors that you do often and you need to look at in a more systematic way, and then towards the end, how you can proceed, what you can improve on for next time. So generally, you have an introduction, which I think is very good. You kind of frame the text and say, this is what I'm going to be talking about. So you lead the reader into the text. Given that we are pretending that this is an article, I think the reader perhaps would like a little bit more. Just, for instance, what might the reader expect you to be doing in the text? It could be like, I would like to discuss, or I'd like to counter, or I'd like to weigh the pros and cons, something like that, so the reader knows what is going to happen. Or are you going to persuade me of something in particular? Might be that your point of view is something you'd like the reader to actually consider or adopt for themselves. Depends on what your perspective is. And in general, I think you have to be a little bit aware of the reader in this type of text, because it's an article and there is a reader and it's not me. So the reader doesn't know the text necessarily, or will have to be reminded of the text at the very least. So when you read through your text, have a critical perspective on it. Try to be a reader when you read through your text. That's what I do when I read this. I consider how much of the information given has been presented, so the reader knows, enough to follow your line of argument. So when you talk about, for instance, unconventional warfare, okay, so in what way? Has that been introduced? Has that been properly described for me to then follow your argument about that? Also, I would say that in this case, I would include more about Ludwig's point of view in order, as I say before, for the reader to understand this and then follow along when you kind of move the whole thing into Afghanistan. Because that means that you seem more credible as a writer when you have described Ludwig in a neutral and sensible way, so that it's so that you've presented his points of views and his arguments, and can then counter them afterwards. So a little bit more on that. So that's the very kind of the overall organization. Getting a little bit closer to how you do it, the actual kind of nuts and bolts. I think that you have a pretty good grasp of how to write a paragraph. But it's something that you need to keep focus on, because every now and again there's a paragraph that doesn't quite have this very specific narrow focus that we'd like a paragraph to have. Remember, a paragraph must only say one thing in general. It can be a general thing, but only one general thing. And it has to have like this topic sentence that says, you know, gives like a label on the paragraph, and then some form of exploration of that, some form of adding on to that label so that we understand more about what it is you want to say. So keep focus on that. You do mention unconventional warfare, but it's not really something that you describe. So I would go back and look at that text and see, have you described that in adequate terms? What does it mean? How can we say conventional warfare counters what Ludwig is saying? I don't think you described that at least not enough, I think. So go back and look at that and see, maybe you want to strike that completely and just say, okay, I thought I was going to write about that, but I actually didn't, so I'm going to remove it completely. That's always an option that you have. If we get into the way that you write, the actual words, the local level, there are a lot of kind of errors in various categories, many categories, but nothing that's systematic. So I can't tell you, you need to work on this particular thing, and then everything's going to get better. I think what you have to work on is training how you write in English, and perhaps also reading some English, basically. We do that for class, of course, but that's for a very specific reason. It might be that your writing will become better from you reading, also from reading. Because when we read, we can start to imitate sentence structures, ways, phrasing, for instance, how things are phrased, how words are used in different kind of linkages with each other. So maybe finding, what I usually say is that choose a topic that's a little bit unfamiliar to you, at a level where the writing is at a level that's challenging but not too difficult. And then give yourself maybe 15 minutes once a week where you read and you are focused on how the thing is written, not what it's about, but how. Focus on the language. And then maybe you can start to imitate. More than 15 minutes is better than 15 minutes, but most people can manage 15 minutes of focused reading. And the reason why I focus on reading is because it's usually a lot easier to get people to read than it is to get them to write more. You know, I will say that if it's something that you want to focus on, we can look at maybe you handing in a couple of paragraphs that you have rewritten from this text, and I can look at them and we can talk about how you can improve them and then I can give you some feedback on that. But if you're not interested in that, I would suggest reading a little bit more in that focused way. Okay, so just to sum up, what I'd like you to do is consider how you frame the text so your reader understands what is going on. Make sure that you present information so that the reader knows what is going to happen and what it is you're arguing about. And then try to get a little bit more flow and structure into your text by imitating how others write. Also, through this, I hope that you can get a more critical look at your text so that you can start to read it as the reader would. Because that means you can start to see the places where there isn't any cohesion, maybe where you need to help the reader. And if you see it from the reader's point of view, you'll see all of those that's a good way of phrasing it. You can start to see where the thread is broken, if you know what I mean. So this red thread that we want running through the text. Sometimes it breaks up. And when you get that reader's perspective into your mind, it is easier to see that. Okay. I think that's all I want to say about your text. I have given you a grade. If you want it, come and see me in class. If you don't want it, that's fine. Some people prefer to not know the grading. I don't care what you choose. It's completely up to you. Yes, let me know what you think when I see you next. Bye.